What if I told you that the grand Viking feasts, brimming with succulent meat, required not a single metallic pot or pan? You might envision a heap of crudely charred sustenance, but that would be a misapprehension. The mastery of Scandinavian chefs resided not in metal, but in their mystic bond with two elemental forces, stone and fire, which they fashioned into flawless gastronomic implements. Continue watching, and you'll uncover how the Vikings conceived intricate dishes and roasted entire oxen using methods that today seem like forgotten sorcery. My forthcoming disclosure will forever alter your perception of the Vikings. For individuals of the Viking Age, a feast transcended mere hunger satisfaction. It was the nucleus of their cosmos, a ceremonial act proclaiming power and affluence. Picture a vast hall teeming with warriors, where tables groaned not under the weight of gold, but with food prepared without a modicum of contemporary civilization's advancements. It was a stage where the konung, or jarl, exhibited his generosity and capacity to sustain the clan, thereby solidifying his right to govern. Seated at lengthy tables, the warriors anticipated not merely meat, but an affirmation of their standing, a recompense for their allegiance. Every morsel served symbolized a triumph from a recent campaign or a generous harvest. To victory! May this unity endure perpetually! The refusal to partake in the feast or a meager offering could be construed as an affront, a testament to the leader's frailty. The entire societal fabric rested upon this steaming aromatic base. The very act of cooking was imbued with as profound a significance as battles or voyages to distant oceans. The cooks and thralls who orchestrated the feast were not mere retainers, but custodians of ancient customs passed down through generations. They discerned which stones retained heat and which, when provoked by fire, would explode into 1,000 shards. They comprehended the vernacular of fire, knowing how to gentle it into smoldering embers for smoking, or unleash it into a furious conflagration for a spit. In this world, cookery was inextricably linked to craftsmanship and even faith. Preparing a meal for hundreds of warriors was as monumental an achievement as constructing a longship. It demanded meticulous planning, immense physical prowess, and a profound intuitive grasp of natural resources. They possessed no thermometers or timers. Their sole instruments were experience, auditory perception, and olfaction. Food served as a conduit between realms, a means to revere the gods and forebears. Grand feasts often coincided with seasonal observances such as Yule, or momentous occasions like nuptials, interments, or a triumphant return from campaign. Sacrificial meat roasted on ritualistic fires was first presented to the deities, then distributed among the community members. In this manner, each participant in the feast became an integral part of a singular collective rite. This methodology transformed an everyday endeavor into a refined art, replete with drama and reverence for nature. They did not subjugate fire and stone. They forged an alliance with them. This alliance was the principal enigma that enabled them to forge culinary masterpieces fit for gods and sovereigns. The Vikings demonstrated that an authentic feast requires no metal, only mastery. The feast embodied the apotheosis of their life philosophy: utilize what you possess and create something magnificent from it. The scarcity of metal was not an impediment, but a formidable challenge they embraced with brilliance. They transmuted necessity into an authentic art form. We are eager to hear your perspective. What are your thoughts on this hallowed approach to cooking? Share your insights in the comments and remember to subscribe to our channel. Are you prepared to uncover the truth that not all stones are equally beneficial? For the Vikings, selecting a stone for the hearth was as crucial as choosing timber for a ship's keel. An error could lead not only to a ruined dinner but also to severe injury. They possessed an inherent understanding of geology, aware that porous and damp stones gathered from waterways would detonate in a fire like miniature grenades. Consequently, for their stoves and hearths, they sought dense, arid rocks such as granite or basalt, which had already demonstrated their resilience. These stones were gathered far from water, often from ancient weathered outcrops. They were transported to the settlement and arrayed in designated woodpiles, permitting them to thoroughly rest and dehydrate. Only such verified stones could integrate into the sacred culinary process. For the Vikings, fire was not merely a heat source, but a sentient, almost intelligent entity. They delineated dozens of its manifestations: a ferocious, roaring blaze for a spit, a placid, uniform warmth for stone griddles, and a barely living, smoky ember for cold smoking. Fire control was a pivotal skill, transmitted from father to son. They could interpret the flame by its hue and the sound it emitted. The colors narrate the tale. Orange provides comfort, but blue harbors the sacred heat. Command the blue, and you command the fire. Preparing a substantial hearth for a feast was quite an undertaking. First, a depression was excavated, or a stone border constructed. Then, the largest, most rigorously tested stones were positioned at the base. Only then was the fire ignited, sustained for hours and occasionally for days, until the stones had accumulated sufficient heat. This process demanded patience and an enormous quantity of fuel. The Vikings predominantly utilized hardwoods like oak or beech, which radiated a consistent, long-lasting heat and minimal soot. Birch logs were also prized, though more for their aromatic smoke employed in smoking. Wood was as significant an ingredient as salt or herbs. Once the stones glowed red-hot, they could serve various purposes. Some remained in the hearth, forming a foundation for the coals. Others, the cleanest and flattest, were meticulously retrieved with wooden tongs. These could be used to pan-fry fish or flatbread. This method was far more efficacious than one might suppose. The stone became a thermal accumulator, releasing heat slowly and uniformly. This allowed the food to bake rather than burn, sealing in all its natural juices. The Vikings essentially pioneered the first induction cooker, where the energy conduit was not metal, but stone. This required considerable expertise. One needed to discern precisely when the stone was ready and how long it would retain its temperature. Not burned at all. But what if I told you that the most remarkable technique lay concealed beneath a substantial layer of earth? In the subsequent segment, we will unveil the secret of the Vikings' subterranean oven, capable of roasting an entire ram without a single spark visible on the surface. Do you wish to unearth the secret that transformed the toughest cuts of meat into the most tender dishes? The Vikings were virtuosos of slow cooking, and their paramount innovation was the earth oven, or grop. The toughest cuts mastered. We feast well tonight, my friends. Skål! This technique represented the zenith of their culinary artistry, demanding not so much ingredients as time, patience, and a precise understanding of physical laws. It commenced with the excavation of a deep pit, typically oval or circular. Its dimensions depended on the scale of the feast. A small pit sufficed for an ordinary meal, but for a celebration honoring the Khnum, they might dig a trench capacious enough to accommodate an entire bull. It was arduous labor, but the ultimate outcome relied on the correct shape and depth of the pit. A thick stratum of those well-chosen dry stones was laid at the bottom of the pit. Then, a colossal fire was kindled within the pit. The fire blazed for many hours, sometimes throughout the night, until the stones at the base were incandescent and the pit's walls had become as hard as ceramics. This constituted the energy accumulation phase, the most critical juncture. When the fire subsided, the majority of the coals and ashes were carefully removed. A thick layer of fresh, moist leaves was spread over the hot stones. Most frequently, birch, maple, or fern leaves were utilized, which provided not only humidity but also a subtle herbaceous aroma. This created a kind of steam cushion that shielded the meat from direct contact with the stones. Then, the primary ingredient was placed in the pit. This could be a whole sheep, pig, or large portions of venison, previously seasoned with salt and wild herbs such as caraway, juniper, and wild garlic. The meat was enfolded in several layers of the same leaves, and occasionally in clean cloth or hide to preserve all the juices. This method was ideal for preparing substantial quantities of food for a feast. It required no constant oversight, freeing hands for other duties. And the outcome surpassed all expectations, transforming even the oldest and toughest meat into a delicacy worthy of Odin's table. If you appreciated this ancient, slow-cooking recipe, remember to like this video. What if I could show you a time machine that would transport you to a Viking kitchen? Envision a flat, smooth stone nestled within the heart of a roaring fire. It hisses and crackles from the intense heat, its surface becoming so scorching that a droplet of water evaporates before it even makes contact. This is not merely a boulder. It is the most ancient frying pan, the perfect instrument for rapid searing. The Vikings excelled at this technique, particularly when they needed to swiftly prepare their fresh catch. They selected large, flat stones from riverbeds, meticulously cleansed them, and calcined them in a fire. This process not only heated the stone but also sterilized its surface. Once the stone was hot, it was extracted from the fire and placed upon the coals. Fish, such as salmon or trout, found their way onto this makeshift cooking surface without the need for gutting or scaling. They were simply placed on the scorching stones. The extreme heat instantly seared the scales and skin, forming a protective barrier that prevented the tender flesh from adhering and locked in all the natural juices and fats. This preparation yielded a meal truly fit for a Norse god. Enjoy, friends. After a short interval, the fish was carefully flipped with a wooden spatula. The outcome was a delicacy featuring skin as crisp as potato chips, while the interior meat remained incredibly soft and succulent, imbued with a delicate, smoky essence. No contemporary non-stick pan can rival this culinary effect. The same technique was employed for baking bread. Thin flatbreads, crafted from a straightforward mixture of barley or rye flour, water, and salt, were tossed directly onto the hot stones, where they quickly puffed up and baked in mere minutes. Such bread served as an excellent accompaniment to fried fish or hearty meat stews. Beyond fish and bread, these stones could be utilized for cooking various other items, including thinly sliced meats, wild mushrooms, or even eggs, transforming the stone into a versatile griddle. It was an ideal method for preparing a swift meal while hiking or hunting, requiring no additional tools. What other culinary creations do you imagine the Vikings devised using these heated slabs? In our next segment, we will uncover how the Vikings ingeniously brewed soup in a wooden trough, employing these very same stones. Look at the steam! It's working! We often assume that a metal pot capable of enduring direct heat is essential for preparing soup or porridge. Yet, the Vikings effortlessly managed without one, utilizing one of the most clever techniques in culinary history. Lacking fireproof cookware, they possessed an abundance of hot stones. This simple fact laid the groundwork for an entire technological approach. Imagine a large wooden trough, or even a hollowed-out log filled with water, meat pieces, and root vegetables. Attempting to build a fire directly beneath such a vessel would inevitably lead to its destruction. Consequently, the Vikings adopted a different strategy. Instead of moving the vessel to the fire, they brought the fire to the vessel, or, more accurately, a concentrated fragment of it encapsulated within a stone. A substantial fire was always maintained nearby during cooking. Within this fire, smooth, medium-sized stones were heated to a glowing red. Using long wooden tongs, as soon as a stone reached incandescence, it was carefully removed from the flames. After allowing any ash to fall away, it was plunged with a hiss into the wooden trough filled with water. The effect was immediate. The water around the stone erupted into countless bubbles, and the entire trough filled with steam. The liquid's temperature ascended rapidly. The stone quickly transferred its heat and cooled, whereupon it was retrieved and returned to the fire to reheat, while another incandescent projectile was launched into the trough. This continuous process demanded coordinated effort. One or two individuals constantly replenished the stones in the fire while another cook managed them in the trough. It was physically demanding labor, but it enabled the water to be kept at a steady boil for several hours. This method facilitated the preparation of nearly anything, not only meat and vegetable broths, but also porridges, such as those made from barley, were cooked in boiling water. This technique was also indispensable for brewing beer, a staple beverage for the Vikings. Heating the wort with stones was the sole viable method in the field. This approach also circumvented the issue of fragile clay pots. While Vikings did possess clay pots, they were costly, heavy, and prone to breakage during travel. A wooden trough, or even a pit lined with impermeable hide, presented a far more practical solution. The result was a rich, savory stew where meat and vegetables were not merely boiled, but gently simmered at a fluctuating temperature. Additionally, the stones imparted a subtle, earthy minerality to the broth, along with a smoky essence from the fire. It was a meal that embodied all fundamental elements: water, fire, and earth. What if I told you that the secret to the perfect steak was known to warriors 1,000 years ago? When it came to cooking truly sizable cuts of meat, the Vikings had one primary answer: an open flame and a spit. But what appeared simple was, in reality, a refined art demanding immense patience and precise calibration. Envision not a modest campfire grill, but a roaring inferno, towering as high as a man. Above it, on robust wooden spits, a whole boar or deer rotated slowly. This elaborate process formed the centerpiece of any grand feast, showcasing abundance and the chef's expertise. Turning such a massive specimen required the combined physical strength of several individuals. The crucial secret lay in the distance from the fire. The meat could not be positioned too close, as it would scorch externally while remaining raw internally. It was maintained at a significant distance, allowing the hot air and radiant heat to slowly cook the carcass. This entire operation could span a full day. Constant rotation was paramount. It ensured uniform cooking on all sides and, more importantly, prevented the precious juices from escaping. With each turn, the meat seemed to seal itself. Dripping fat sizzled upon the coals, rising as aromatic smoke that permeated the carcass. To combat dryness during the many hours of roasting, the meat was continually basted. Simple yet effective marinades were concocted for this purpose, utilizing whatever was available: beer or ale, honey, salt water, and crushed wild herbs like juniper, which infused the meat with a distinctive northern flavor. What do you believe the Vikings considered the most prized marinade? In the next chapter, we will transition from the intense heat of the fire to the cool embrace of shade, discovering how the Vikings mastered food preservation for months using only smoke. For Vikings living in an unforgiving climate where winter dominated most of the year, food preservation was a matter of survival. A bountiful fish catch or a successful hunt held little value if the spoils could not be stored. Here, another ally came to the forefront: smoke, which the Vikings learned to manipulate with surgical precision. They practiced two primary methods of smoking: hot and cold. Hot smoking was an expedited process that simultaneously cooked the food and offered light preservation. Fish or meat was suspended near hot coals in an enclosed smokehouse pit. The heat and dense smoke rapidly cooked the product, imparting a golden hue and a unique fragrance. Such food was immediately ready for consumption and incredibly delicious, though its shelf life was limited to only a few days. It served as a means to swiftly prepare a large quantity of food, for instance, after a fruitful fishing expedition, to be enjoyed at the next feast. In this scenario, the smoke acted primarily as a flavoring agent. Cold smoking was a true art form. This technique did not cook the food, but rather mummified it, rendering it suitable for storage for many months. For this purpose, specialized smokehouses were constructed, often as long trenches covered with turf or as separate windowless huts. The fundamental principle was to keep the smoke source distant from the product itself. A fire was kindled in a pit at one end of the trench. The smoke from smoldering, barely alive logs, most frequently alder or juniper, traveled through a lengthy underground channel. By the time it reached the chamber where fish or meat hung on poles, it had cooled completely. The product, previously steeped in a potent salt solution, remained in this cool, smoky chamber for several days, sometimes even weeks. The smoke gradually penetrated the tissues, expelling moisture and eradicating bacteria. The meat and fish became denser, dried out, and developed a protective, resinous crust. This process demanded continuous oversight. The fire could not be permitted to flare up lest the product cook. It had to smolder, producing thick, cold smoke. The fire required vigilance day and night, with sawdust or wet branches added to maintain the desired smoke density. It was monotonous yet vital labor. A misstep in this endeavor meant losing the entire winter's food supply. Therefore, the smoker commanded as much respect as a warrior or a blacksmith. He was the custodian of the future, the individual who literally imparted longevity to food. Food processed in this manner became remarkably resistant to spoilage. Cold smoking was essentially a chemical preservation method where the smoking substances functioned as antiseptics. They created an impermeable barrier on the surface of the fish or meat, resistant to bacteria. This technology empowered the Vikings to undertake their renowned long sea voyages. Beyond meat and fish, bread constituted a crucial element of the Viking diet, and no metal was required for its creation. The simplest method involved baking flatbreads on stones, as previously discussed. However, for genuine bread, fluffy and substantial, an oven was necessary, and the Vikings constructed these from clay and stone. Careful, it is too hot to handle right now. These were dome-shaped ovens, closely resembling modern wood-fired pizza ovens. A frame was fashioned from willow rods, which were then coated in multiple layers with a mixture of clay, sand, and chopped straw. The clay served as a heat-resistant material, and the straw reinforced the structure, preventing cracking. Once the clay dome had dried, a robust fire was ignited inside. This not only consumed the interior willow frame, but also tempered the clay, transforming it into robust ceramics. Such a stove, constructed in a single day, could serve its owner for several years. The baking method was straightforward and efficient. A blaze was ignited within the oven and maintained for several hours until the walls absorbed sufficient heat. Subsequently, all embers and ash were meticulously swept out. The oven was ready for use once its interior surfaces became pristine and white from the thermal energy. The dough is ready for the heat. Soon, we will feast well. Formed bread loaves crafted from rye or barley flour were placed inside with a wooden shovel. The oven's entrance was firmly sealed with a clay-coated wooden damper for airtightness. The bread baked exclusively from the heat stored in the thick clay walls. This heat dissipated gradually and uniformly, creating optimal conditions for baking. The bread did not scorch. Instead, it slowly cooked, rising and acquiring a thick, crisp crust. The flavor of such bread, with a subtle, smoky aroma, was unparalleled. Other dishes could also be prepared in the cooling oven. After the bread, pots of porridge or soup were set in the oven, where they finished cooking over several hours. In this manner, a single heating of the oven was maximally leveraged. This bread is truly excellent. I can already taste the oats in the porridge. Viking culinary practices extended beyond mere heat treatment. Processes we now categorize as biotechnologies played a substantial role, primarily fermentation. This approach not only preserved sustenance but also enhanced its flavor and yielded beverages. The principal Viking drinks were beer, ale, and mead. Their production required nothing more than wooden vats and stones. As previously noted, the wort for beer was warmed by immersing hot stones to initiate the grain's saccharification process. Following heating and cooling, the wort was left in large wooden vats. Fermentation began with wild yeast, either airborne or harbored in the vat's pores from prior batches. This natural process converted simple barley water into a nourishing and intoxicating drink. Such ale was not merely a form of entertainment, but a crucial component of the diet. It was a high-calorie liquid bread that furnished energy. Moreover, given the questionable quality of potable water, a low-alcohol beverage was frequently a safer option, as boiling and fermentation eliminated most bacteria. Fermentation was also a vital technique for preserving fish, particularly in Scandinavia's northern regions. Well-known pungent dishes are a vestige of that era. Fish was salted and allowed to ferment in barrels or pits for several months. This procedure, which seems extreme today, was an ingenious solution for frigid climates. Fermentation decomposed proteins and fats, rendering the fish suitable for prolonged storage without smoking or drying. It was preservation through a controlled process. The triumph of Viking cooking, reliant on stone and fire, would have been impossible without a full complement of auxiliary tools. Although they were familiar with metal, more accessible and simpler materials dominated daily kitchen routines: wood, bone, and clay. Wood was a versatile material. Everything was carved from it, from enormous troughs for cooking and fermentation to personal bowls and spoons. Every Viking carried a personal spoon, which served as both cutlery and a status symbol. Master carvers created ladles, scoops, and stirrers that were ideally suited for preparing hot food. The wooden tongs and grippers we discussed were the sole safe means of handling hot stones. These were simple but utterly indispensable implements. Bone and horn were also utilized. Horns were employed to fashion sturdy and aesthetically pleasing drinking cups that resisted odor absorption better than wood. Two-pronged forks were carved from bone, though these were used more for serving than for eating. Clay dishes, despite their fragility, were still in use. These were primarily pots for storing bulk goods or porridge. However, placing them over an open flame was perilous, as they could crack. Consequently, they were more often used in cooling ovens or for presenting food at the table. Stone functioned not only as a cooking surface, but also as a processing tool. Heavy stone mortars and pestles were found in every household. They were used to grind grain into flour, crush salt, and pulverize herbs, creating aromatic blends. This entire system was self-sufficient and remarkably eco-friendly. All tools were manufactured from renewable or readily available materials. A broken wooden spoon or a cracked clay pot did not become refuse. They simply returned to the earth or fire from which they originated. We observed that the Viking world was built not solely on the steel of swords, but also on the warmth of stones. Their capacity to create feasts using only the fundamental elements demonstrates not primitiveness, but the pinnacle of skill and adaptation. They transformed their harsh environment into a fount of abundance, proving that a true feast arises not from technology, but from the spirit's inventiveness. Tomorrow we embark on the greatest raid of our lives. The gods favor the bold, and we shall return laden with glory and gold. What other facets of Viking life and craftsmanship would you like us to explore? Suggest topics for future videos you wish to see in the comments, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel so you do not miss new journeys into the past.